I'm Colin Oriens. I'm the director of the Environmental Studies program. And this is a really exciting year because we're celebrating 40 years of the Environmental Studies program at Tufts, which just feels quite momentous. It was kind of it was new back in the early 80s to create environmental studies programs. And Norton Nickerson, the founding director, sort of really built it up. And then it's changed hands a couple times, and I became director in 2010. So it's my pleasure to welcome you, and it's my pleasure specifically to welcome you to the Hoke Cunningham Environmental Lecture Series, which happens every Thursday at noon, and we hope you'll come. This year we're celebrating our 40th, so our featured speakers will be alumni. Most of them will be alumni of the Environmental Studies program. So if you are an undergrad student and wondering, what does a career in the environmental studies look like? Please come. And if you want to come every week, talk to Dr. Gomez, and there's even an opportunity to do it for credit. So picking alumni for this was super, super challenging. There are so many alumni doing really cool work. How do you pick? And so we had some sort of principles that we were looking for. We wanted to get people who span the years. So we have speakers from 1987 all the way up to 2019. Environmental studies is also incredibly diverse in where people work and the kind of work they do. So we tried to get people that were more in the social sciences, some more in the arts, some that were writers, some that were scientists, some that are truly interdisciplinary in all of the way they think and do, including today's speaker. So I think that what you'll find is this semester's talks will really reflect the breadth of what environmental studies is. If you want to learn more about the upcoming talks, I would encourage you to take a look at that scan, and it'll give you a sense of the talks that we have for this semester, and we hope you enjoy them. The program has grown in leaps and bounds over the years, and it's been really fun to see it grow. And I'm going to spend some time reflecting on those individuals and organizations that really have helped it thrive. Barbara, are you here? Okay. So I'll take a moment now to sort of think about ways in which the program is growing. And I want to just start by saying the administration has been really critical to our growth. They provided resources, they provided people, and it's really the people that makes a program work and tick. So I want to first and foremost say the students. The students have been amazing. They're so passionate. They really are looking for ways to make the environment better, both for people and for the organisms that we share the world with. When I became director in 2010, we had less than 50 declared majors. Today, we have over 200 majors and minors in the major, in the program. When I became director in 2010, we had me, whose primary appointment is biology, so I was a part-time director, and then we had a half-time program coordinator. Today, we have myself, a full-time associate director, and a full-time program coordinator. And I want to just say a special call out to Sinette and Coco Gomez for just all the work that you do to make the program thrive. Faculty have been really critical to this growth. In 2010, we didn't have any faculty in the program. Today, we have 4 faculty that sort of help us bring what is really truly an interdisciplinary sort of way of thinking and approaching to it. Plus, we have lots of faculty in other departments that sort of really help glue the environmental studies program, bridge it to across the school. We have lots of part-time lecturers as well that have professional experience. They're like professors of the practice, and they bring sort of real-world experience to the classroom. And that's been really helpful as our students think about how they want to navigate. And all the members of the executive committee who've come every month to help advise on the growth of the program. I think environmental studies and the environment in general is a really important bridge to any academic discipline, any school at Tufts, and that's been really helpful. Tufts alumni have been super, super important. They've come back and given talks. They've been incredibly generous. And so today we have Roland Hoke here in the front and Daphne Hoke Cunningham, who have endowed this series. And thank you so much for your support for this program. Also, we've had incredible support from alumni who are giving to sort of help students with internships and research experiences. And this is really a priority of ours looking forward, is like, how do we give our students real world experience before they graduate so they're more competitive when they graduate? So I also want to just thank Sam, the Dean of the Environmental Studies Program, Heather Nathans, who was our previous Dean, Barbara Brisuello, the interim Dean of Arts and Sciences, and Barbara was also the Dean for the Environmental Studies Program for quite a few times. So without their support, very little of this can happen. So I'd like to welcome Barbara to come up and just say a few words.
Thank you so much, Colin, and welcome everyone. Thank you for being here, and I guess happy birthday, right?
Yes.
40th. I mean, because it's a for the program, not Colin, not Colin. The program, 40 years is a big benchmark, as those of you who have gotten past 40 know. As Colin said, I think I was your dean for 7 years. So I really, really, really appreciate, Colin, your leadership for the program. You've meant so much to the school and to the program. Also, Coco, who was in the back, and as you all know, so many things happen thanks to Coco, right? Including this event and this series. As Colin was saying, this is probably, it's a good question to ask ourselves, but it's probably the one program that has connections to probably every single other department in arts and sciences. The humanities, the social sciences, the STEM departments, as well as other schools. One of the projects that we worked on together was a food studies and systems minor, which really became an important connection to the Friedman School downtown. So I also want to thank Daphne and Roland for being here. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your generosity towards the program, towards the school. This is one of the most vibrant, regular events that we have on campus for students and for faculty as well. I look forward to hearing the lecture. I'm sorry I was a little late. I tried to bike as fast as I could from one meeting to the next. Thank you all so much for being here. And again, thanks, Colin and Coco, for your leadership.
So before I introduce today's speaker, and I don't want to take any more of his, as little of his time as possible, I just want to go through some logistics things. So the newsletter, if you want to learn more about the environmental studies program and the talks and the series, there's going to be a sign-up sheet that's passing around. We are going to be raffling 3 books from today's speaker. So if you're interested in receiving, possibly receiving one of these books, you can enter the raffle. I think that will also be being passed around. And at the end, we'll announce our winners. The other, so please sign up. The newsletter, for those of you who are students, we've had so many students tell us this is how I found my job or my internship, because they open the newsletter every week. So take a look at those newsletters. It'll not just tell you about our talks here, but also possible opportunities for you. If you want to view a lecture that's passed and you unfortunately missed it, most of our lectures are recorded, and you can go on to the Environmental Studies website and look at that recording. So we'd encourage you to do that. But you can also check out things that are coming up on the website. And if you're on Zoom for this meeting, we're going to be putting things in the chat, both for the newsletter and for the semester schedule for the talk. So take a look at your chat if you're on Zoom. Welcome to you as well. And then for those of you on Zoom, the chat is disactivated. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A, and then we'll try to ask those at the end. If you're here in the audience, raise your hand and we'll bring a mic to you. Since the meeting is recorded, you need to wait to ask your question until you have the mic, okay? And usually within 48 hours, the talks are online. So join us in welcoming Dr. Saleem Ali to Tufts, back to Tufts. Saleem was a 1994 environmental studies major with a double major in chemistry. Thank you, chemistry, for co-sponsoring today's talk. He's a true environmental researcher, interdisciplinary. He's always thinking about connections, and he's going to talk a lot about that today. He's had an incredibly prolific year. I encourage you to read his bio online. He works on really critical environmental issues of the day, and he has a keen eye for what we need to be addressing as a society. I first met him about 13 years ago when he was a professor at UVM. He gave a talk, and I remember it was incredibly inspiring. He makes complex issues accessible, and it makes you want to get involved and get active. Really, as I mentioned, he's dedicated to working across disciplines. He's globally recognized. Early in his career, he was selected as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. He's a frequent contributor to various working groups at the United Nations, and he serves on many, many boards. He's a prolific writer, and so please enter the contest and you can get one of his books. Thank you for agreeing to give the keynote address for this year. Welcome back, Professor Ali.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Colin, for the generous introduction. You can all hear me all right? Okay, great. It's really a pleasure to be back at Tufts after so many years. I would like to also acknowledge and thank Sinette and Coco and Colin and Daphne and Roland for inviting me, for the support that's provided in facilitating this effort, and to all the faculty who are here. It's wonderful to see that several faculty from across campus are here. I'd also like to especially acknowledge Professor Jonathan Harris, who was one of my mentors when I was here, and he opened the doors to ecological economics for me. And so the fact that he has come is special for me as well. All right, so let's get rolling. Basically, my talk is about my book, Earthly Order, but I've tried to craft it in a way that is accessible, hopefully, and of interest to a broader audience. Earthly Order is about systems thinking, how to move the conversation from what we call world order. People at Fletcher call everything new world order. And what I argue as an environmental science, system science person is world order misses the point. You really need to think about planetary support systems. And so hence I coined this term earthly order, which is what we should all be aspiring towards. And the book tries to provide sort of the foundational knowledge around some of the laws of nature, which we need to appreciate in order for us to build the edifice of civilization more broadly. So those of you interested in social media, et cetera, certainly welcome to connect therein, whether it's LinkedIn or X, or I have not boycotted X yet. I'm on the edge at times, but and then Instagram too. So I'd like to also honor some of my other mentors at Tufts who are not with us. Sadly, Norton Nickerson and Jonathan Kenny have both passed away. I put this in this sequence because Norton Nickerson, of course, is the founder of the Environmental Studies program. And I had the good fortune of being a student in one of his classes when he was close to retirement. And this is a photo. I couldn't find a photo of him online. This is the only one I found was him eating a sandwich. But he was more silver-haired when I was a student. And then Robert Stolo, who really, he's the one who got me so excited about chemistry, especially organic chemistry. And I took both his organic chemistry courses. They had this very gentle style of communication on the blackboard, writing out, with effortless ease, he would just, put all these formulas in, didn't need to look at notes. So I want to acknowledge him. I think he is emeritus and retired, but still with us. Jonathan Kenny, I've put as a bridge between the environment and the chemistry because he's the one who really got me thinking about environmental chemistry. I worked in his lab. He did groundwater chemistry, and so thanks to them, I am what I am. We owe it to our mentors, our elders, who enabled us, who opened doors for us. I hope you students will appreciate that. Don't be cynical about your elders. Definitely think of how important they are. Right. So let's get to the topic at hand, systems. So when we talk about systems, the term is used colloquially in lots of ways, but it has very particular connotations in science. These are some of the key attributes of a system. Systems require a diversity of nodes. They require us to have different kind of entities that you can connect, right? And then systems have networks, which is those connections that you are making, and some of them can be quite complex, and hence the term complex systems. There's interdependence in systems. So if something goes wrong with one part of a system, it's likely that there will be an impact on another part of the system. And that's what a lot of planet Earth is about, right? It's these connections, hence we use the word ecosystem. But the other important attribute of systems is that they can be adaptive also, and that they can respond to change. Then there's this particular term called complex systems, and there's a whole field of scientific inquiry that has developed around complex systems, because complex systems then have some additional attributes, where some of those which are often not well understood are the non-linear aspects of systems. So you end up with more than the sum of the parts in terms of how a complex system operates. And then there are other aspects of them in terms of self-organization, unpredictability, which are significant. And those of you who are interested in this, especially the undergrads, there is the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico, which does a fantastic program on complex systems in the summer that you can apply for. Very competitive to go and actually visit as well. And another one of my Tufts mentors has just entered, Rick Wetzler, whom I need to also thank for coming. Now, in Earthly Order, one of my goals in the book was to try and figure out how to navigate natural systems with social and political systems, right? So it was a very ambitious book to write because I had to cover such a broad canvas. But one of the diagrams that really helped me was from John Barrow's book, Constants of Nature. This is a book written by a physicist. John Barrow was a professor at Cambridge in England. He wrote this book about, physical constants, and he tried to lay it out in terms of how we might think about constants in all of scientific inquiry. So on the x-axis, you have the complexity of a phenomenon, which deals with what I was saying, complex systems part. And on the y-axis, you have uncertainty about basic equations. Can you actually put something in an equation and measure it through that? And equations are a way by which, they're a tool by which we can do those measurements. And you see that you can see where all these things end up. A lot of complex system research actually originated in meteorology, the work of people like Lorenz down the road at MIT, where my other alma mater, I should say, where I did my PhD, was around looking at how weather systems form. And developing equations around that is actually fairly easy to do, but they're very complex, and that's why you can't have a weather prediction more than a week or 10 days, right? But you can see long-term trends in climate, which you can measure over long periods of time. So that's another aspect of it. But look at where social sciences, economics, and finance are. There you've got very high complexity, and you've got very few equations. Much as our friends in economics think they can put everything in an equation, that's actually a physicist telling you that it's actually really hard to put them in an equation, right? That's why economic models often end up being inaccurate, because it's so hard to put them in equations. And that was one of the lessons from ecological economics, which I learned right here at Tufts, that you need to be humble about how much you can put in an equation when you're dealing with social and behavioral systems. And then you have up there quantum gravity. By the way, for the physics people here, we don't yet have a theory of quantum gravity. That's kind of the holy grail of basic sciences. How can you reconcile Einstein's theory of relativity with quantum mechanics? And one of the ways could be quantum gravity, which is not very complex, actually. If you think about it, it's just a matter of figuring out. So the complexity is not that much. There's a certain number of variables that you would be looking at, but you don't have an equation to reconcile it, okay? So that's just a way to think through it. The other very fundamental concept in systems is understanding entropy. And entropy is a measure that is also often misunderstood. There are different kinds of entropy, but in general, we talk about it as the level of disorder, which is okay as a definition, but there is also informational entropy, and it's basically the level of structures that you can form with reference to energy in a system. There's actually, if you want to see a video on entropy for the undergrad, especially who like to do YouTube browsing, see the Veritasium video on entropy in 15 minutes. It's the best one on entropy, really. A lot of other Veritasium stuff is not very good, like self-driving cars. I wouldn't recommend that one, but the entropy video is pretty good. What I'm trying to show here is that complexity and entropy are not the same. And you have to recognize the difference, because many times they get conflated. So in Earth systems, especially, we know that you're going to have an increase in entropy unless you put some energy to change that process. And that's fundamental to how we understand any kind of planetary change process as well, right? It's going to end up getting more disordered. With complexity, it's a little different, because what you can have is you can get homogenization in a system, and you can get what we call the new normal, right? And that becomes a challenge. So for example, the best way to describe this is you have coffee and milk, and you put coffee in milk, or you put milk in coffee. It seems the baristas put more coffee in milk than milk in coffee nowadays. But what you're doing essentially is you're creating a situation where the entropy is going up, but the complexity will reach a point where it will go up and then it'll go down. Why? Because it'll mix. Once you mix the coffee and the milk, it becomes homogeneous, and so the complexity actually goes down. And if you look at any system, natural system, others, you see the same happens. You get this disruption, and then you get this kind of plateauing, but the entropy is still going up, all right? Important differentiation. Another way to think about systems is also in terms of their predictability. And so in the book also, I go through that, where you got predictable systems can be simple or complicated. And there's a big difference between complicated and complex, right? Because complicated systems have parts where you can go in and fix something, even if it has many parts. So you have what we may say, the known knowns are the simple, the known unknowns, where you still know what it is, but there's a problem, but you can fix it. In complex systems, you have unknown unknowns. And this is, some of you may remember the famous Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld's speech, where he said all this about there are known unknowns, and people thought he was just like talking gibberish, but actually he was talking sense. People didn't realize that the guy did have some idea of this kind of issue. And that's what he was getting at. And then you have the functionally random systems, which are just unknowable, right? And just as an example, an ordered system, predictable, simple car ignition, an engine is complicated, but it's predictable. Something goes wrong, you can fix it. Traffic in a city is complex. It's very unpredictable. You can't often figure out why is it that you have this area that got suddenly clogged. And then a car being hit by lightning would be functionally random. Then you have this really interesting phenomenon of scaling in systems also, which is important for understanding planetary processes, because you get over time these different kinds of this is from a paper called about asymptotic burnout. You don't have to worry about it, but basically the main thing is that you can get with any kind of planetary process, you can get these areas where you get what is sometimes called super scaling. You get this immense rise in impact, and that can lead to a situation where you can have a crisis or a crash. Okay, so this is some of the other work that's really important for us to understand. And for those of you interested in this topic, particularly, there's a book called Scale by physicist Jeffrey West, which is very readable, fantastic, and it's about what they call the power laws. And power laws are about scaling in this way. I'm sorry I'm rushing through because I'm conscious of the time, but this is, it's a vast topic. But and that's why I'm giving you these additional citations so you can go into it in more detail. But you can see what could happen. And then you have these in environmental systems also, you can have points of reset, or because if you don't, you can go into this situation where if you don't have enough resources and that's going up, whether it's population or anything else, it can suddenly lead to a crash. The other aspect of Earth systems is, of course, how we reconcile space and energy, or shapes and energy. And we know that, there are these amazing patterns in nature. Why is it that you have honeycombs are all hexagons? Well, it's because there is going to be a tendency to try and reduce as much of your energy footprint around those structures, right? So you're going to try and create structures which are going to both save space and energy in terms of that. And hexagons are very good in terms of packing these things. Now, the title of the talk was Systems Leaders for the 21st Century, right? Now, bees, I think, are really, in many ways, systems leaders, I would say. If we start, our CEOs start to think like a beehive, imagine what that implies. And what does that mean in terms of coordination? And what it means in terms of discipline? And figuring out what works. And in some ways, it may seem very scary, right? Because it shows that there's this kind of blind following of a particular view. But there are some attributes. To be a systems thinker, you need to take some attributes from nature and then apply them. You don't want to just say, this is a cookie cutter that you apply completely. But there's some real nuggets of natural lessons that you get from all of these examples that you can apply more broadly. Oops, sorry. Now, with patterns, the other thing a systems leader has to do is what I was cautioning you around is take things eclectically where you think it is useful because human systems are not completely going to follow a system that is preordained. And this is one of the things in the book I talk about. The ancient Greeks, they talked about order in two ways. Okay, one word for order they used was cosmos, which we all know, right? Cosmos is the natural order, the way the universe works. But there was another term they used called taxis. Taxis was invented order, where humans came in and created order. And my view as an environmental pragmatist, you might say, is we need both cosmos and taxis. Right? So there are times when you will have the allure of having some order because of a natural system. Like these circles, there is this tendency where we see in natural systems that you're going to create this. So this is, in architecture, there's a tendency to try and have this kind of dynamic. This is a map of the garden cities, and that was a concept that Ebenezer Howard came up with, where, to design these kind of polycentric cities around a hub. And it makes a lot of sense to some degree because you want to minimize transport distances, just like I was saying with the energy. So, it shows some good insights from natural order being put in place. But in other cases, it can be weird. Anyone know what this city is? Plan of the city? What does it look like? Like an aeroplane, right? This is the capital of Brazil, Brasilia. It was designed just because the architect thought that it would be really cool to have a city which looked like an aeroplane. But also there was another reason. He also said that this kind of design would reduce car crashes, which it hasn't really done. But there was some reasoning that it would lead to fewer intersections and you would have fewer car crashes. So there was, you have to, it's also an iterative process with systems leadership. You have to understand the laws of nature. You have to understand how these different kinds of complexities play out, but then you have to also test it and you have to see what works. That's part of the challenge of a complex system. Because it's unpredictable, you have to sometimes test it in that way. So ultimately, what we're getting at is we have to understand hierarchies, okay, in natural systems. This is a diagram which you're probably familiar with, right? Very common one, the Sustainable Development Diagram, that goes back to, the Brundtland Commission and even earlier, perhaps. But it's like sustainability is 3 legs to a stool. You have social, economic, and environment. And then sustainable is kind of where there's the overlap. What's missing in this Venn diagram, which is used so much, it's like emblazoned upon every textbook on the environment, probably, right? What's missing is there's no hierarchy, right? Look at this diagram. This one is showing you the hierarchy, right? So you have natural order and you have economic and social order where the intersection is political order. This is what I have tried to propose. My approach in earthly order is to move from here to here. And I would hope that systems leaders, the CEOs and the prime ministers and presidents, would also start to consider that there is this ultimate dependence around natural systems. The other aspect of this is that we have to go through these processes in ecological systems, certainly, of what are called sometimes panarchy cycles. If you go back to the work of Gunderson and Holling, and this is when you're wondering who this chap is, the half goat, half human, that's the Greek god Pan, was god of nature. And Pan was a bit confused because of his unusual anatomy, and hence the word panic actually comes from Pan. But the panarchy cycles, recognize that there is this kind of tension between humans and nature, okay? There is a tension. And the panarchy cycles are the ways by which you move through and try to adapt in a complex adaptive system. And these are variables which are used in ecology, carrying capacity, and so on. But just to give you a sense, that's what you have to move towards in order to be a real systems leader as well. Now, talking about sustainability, oftentimes people use these terms. So I wanted to make sure the students, especially in environmental studies, are able to differentiate and are not misled by this, just the term weak versus strong. So sustainability, when we talk about many times with renewable systems, right? We talk about something is renewable on human timescales, agriculture, forests. We are often referring to strong sustainability. And these are some of the attributes of strong sustainability, which I'm not going to read through, but you can see what they are, right? And then we talk about this term weak sustainability that is often disparaged because there's a sense that you cannot renew the system on human timescales, but it can be confusing. So a lot of my empirical research is on mining and environmental and social impact of mining. And in the case of mining, it's often presented as an example of weak sustainability because we know that the minerals are not going to be replenished on human timescales. If you have a copper mine, the copper is not going to be replenished on human timescales, right? It will be replenished perhaps on geological timescales because you do have volcanic processes and others which could replenish it. But functionally speaking, the copper is actually replenishable for human use. Because if you can invest enough energy to get the copper out of whatever other material it has been converted into, copper oxide or copper sulfate, it's still copper. The element hasn't changed. The only time you change an element, for my chemistry friends who know, any chemistry majors here? No chemistry majors, okay, but we have the head of the chemistry department here. The only way you have a conversion of one element to another is through a nuclear reaction, right? And if you're not having a nuclear reaction, you're not converting the element into another, you're converting it into another compound, and you are able to, in general terms, extract it back. So the weak sustainability, you have to think through, like, is it really non-renewable for human functionality? And whether it is a matter of recycling it or whether it's a matter of modular design and so on. And that's also part of being a systems leader because you're trying to think in terms of what we call industrial ecology, which is a very vibrant field. I hope there's a course in industrial ecology now at Tufts, or no? Not yet. I think there should be one where they're teaching life cycle analysis and all those kinds of techniques, because that will tell you then what is the environmental footprint of recycling versus other kinds of processes of manufacturing and so on. So weak sustainability, don't necessarily write it off. The other thing with weak sustainability is the minerals themselves or any kind of resource which is not being replenished on human timescales, it could still be used to generate other forms of capital, right? From natural capital to other service sector capital. So the classic example I give is San Francisco is a city which is essentially a service sector city, right? Most of it is a knowledge economy. It's got all the tech firms, and so on. But why did San Francisco become a tech hub? Why was it San Francisco? Actually, the climate's not that. It was very foggy. You can't say it's the climate. LA has better climate, I would say. The reason was because the California gold rush happened there. And the California gold rush led to enormous amounts of wealth that was generated and was wisely redirected towards other forms of institutional development, like Stanford University, for example, which was built by Leland Stanford. His son died. He decided to donate money to have all this farmland in Palo Alto, created a university, which became a tech hub over time, and that led to the service economy, right? So you can say that the gold, even though the gold itself was not renewable and pretty terrible conditions for mining, it led to the natural capital being converted to other forms of capital, which led to sustainable. Now, they didn't plan it out. They were not thinking of this, but it's just if you are a systems leader, you start to think what can happen in those kinds of terms. The other thing is we need to consider granularity always. There's this famous thing called the coastline paradox, which means you can never measure how long a coast is, right? Often people think they can, but you can't because it depends where you're drawing the line. So the granularity needs to be very carefully considered in any of your measurements and recognizing that at some point you're approximating things, right? And so that goes into a lot of systems thinking as well. The other aspect, apart from weak and strong sustainability, there's also this notion in systems thinking called weak and strong emergence. Now, usually when we talk about emergence in complex systems, it's the weak form of emergence. It's basically that it's something that you can still reduce to individual parts, but it's multifaceted and it's complex and so on. So life, you might say, some people would say life is a form of weak emergence because it does have a complex systems dynamic. And once you die, it's very difficult to reverse it completely. But we know that we haven't figured it out so far. Because of the certain tipping points that happen in terms of energy flows and it's irreversible reactions that happen biochemically. But it's a form of weak emergence still. Strong emergence actually is something where it's not reducible to parts at all. And this is something that is philosophically really interesting. And there's a Tufts connection to this. People have argued that consciousness is a form of strong emergence. But we have, of course, the great Daniel Dennett, who was at Tufts. And I had the good fortune of when he was a professor here, and I did take one class with him and with Norman Daniels, who was one of his colleagues in philosophy. But he was of the belief that you don't have anything as strong emergence. He felt that consciousness could be reduced to synapses in the brain. And he was very much what people call a hard Darwinist in that way. But this is still a big area for research and debate, and so whether there is such a thing as strong emergence, whether there are quantum factors at play. Some people have suggested that there's a lot of quantum mechanics which we don't fully understand. It may play a role. We don't know, but this is an active area for further inquiry, certainly. But Dennett and a lot of very distinguished philosophers of consciousness continue to feel that, and we don't know. So I just say I want to keep learning about it. Now, coming to in terms of just the business world, do you have any people who are working in industry? One of my other career journeys was that after I finished from Tufts, I went to do my master's in environmental studies which was at Yale. And that was thanks to Rick Wetzler, who wrote my letter of recommendation going directly forward. And there, I had a chance to work on industrial ecology. And I came across the work of people like John Ehrenfeld, who has questioned the role of technology and also how we should think about systems connections to the role of technology. And then I ended up working in industry. This chap, anyone recognize? That's Jack Welch, the former CEO of General Electric. After I finished my master's at Yale, 2 years I worked at GE. Because at the time, I was like, oh, I have to pay off my student loans. I have to, get a real job. And okay, so 2 years I was at GE, which was an amazing time because Jack Welch was a legendary CEO. He's considered the man who transformed GE. This was an old electric company started by Thomas Edison, and he made it a diversified company. In some ways, people would say he was a systems leader because he saw the potential of GE. GE ended up, when I was there, it was one of America's largest companies. And it was selling everything from mortgages to aircraft engines, And now they're headquartered in Boston, actually, but they weren't then. They used to be in Fairfield, Connecticut. But you can see my ideal world would be where you have someone like John Ehrenfeld, who is keeping us on target in terms of thinking about systems and environmental issues and the limits of technology. One of his key things is reducing unsustainability does not create sustainability. Because in a system, you have to think about things like the rebound effect, where, for example, if you have a hybrid car, it's a great technology, right? But a hybrid car may lead you to drive more than you otherwise would because you're feeling good that you're driving a hybrid car. Well, your system's impact will be worse than your internal combustion engine car then, because not only is the car more material intensive, it's got the internal combustion engine and it's got the electric car battery, plus you're driving more. So then you're not doing much good for the planet. So you have to keep track of the rebound effect constantly, right? So the ideal systems leaders would be ones who have the vision, because Welch was not a very environmentally inclined man. The one interesting thing with Welch was he was among the very few CEOs who was trained in academia at the highest level. He had a PhD in chemical engineering. You don't have many CEOs in America who have PhDs in any sciences, let alone, they may get a JD in law, but they don't usually have a PhD in the sciences. But he did. And he started off in GE Plastics, but then he became very much, conventional CEO. But the vision he had was very much of that kind of diversification. He just didn't have a very environmentally oriented vision of a system. But otherwise, I would say he was a systems leader. So we have to move towards, the adaptive systems part, which is really important now, is this is a conventional adaptive system. Ultimately, with climate change and all the challenges we have at hand, we are going to need to find a way to adapt. And my next big book project is actually about climate change from the point of view of how can we thrive in climate change so it's a difficult book to write because I don't want it to come across as being sanguine or complacent about how climate change is a terrible disruption and we have to recognize it. But it's basically about what can we do to adapt in a way where we could potentially thrive even with a changed climate, okay? And as a planner, because my PhD is in planning, I'm always focused on the future. So I'm always like, yeah, we can't just lament the past, all kudos to our historians, but we have to move forward as well and think about what needs to be done forward. So now if you think about, this is the conventional way of, Walmart thinking about adapting. This is like micro level. Walmart is a very adaptive company. It's the most adaptive. One of the reasons why Walmart became so powerful was the speed of adaptation that it did. Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, was a clerk in JCPenney, and he realized that JCPenney was a losing proposition. They were not doing very well. They're still kind of, limping along now, but still. He had the vision to see like you could sell everything, and if you had a very tight coupled adaptive system, you could do very well. So this was the way he thought about it. So that's another way of systems thinking, right? But what I'm talking about is then connecting that to ecological adaptive systems. And this is one of the things I worked on with the World Economic Forum was, how do we think about ways in which both environmental and ethical mechanisms can be brought in to the conventional adaptive system. And I don't have time to go into it, but this kind of material is also covered within earthly order. So finally, this is where we are at. We have a situation, and this is from a book which is, I think, not as well appreciated as it should be by an Australian academic called Evolution's Edge. And it basically says, look, we go through these cycles, and we're going through this situation of, whether it is in terms of complexity and homogenization and disruptions and back and forth. And we're at this point of a crisis. So either as a civilization, we can find a way to work through as systems leaders and move towards the evolution of a more adapted system, or we can move towards fragmentation. And this would be, it wouldn't be that the planet would become uninhabitable necessarily, but it would be like a Blade Runner world, or a sort of a dystopia, which you would not necessarily be very keen to live in. So some attributes of systems learning, just to sum up: patterns raise useful questions, but not always useful answers. Natural order is ultimate, but humanistic order is proximate, which is that you have to look at the point at which we are operating. Transitions in and out of order are not always reversible in space and time, hence the tipping points. And these tipping points can lead to accelerated order or disorder, depending on whether it's a positive feedback loop. And then systems leaders embrace both cosmos and taxis, which is what I was referring to as both discovered order and invented order. So there's the book Earthly Order. If you're interested, I'm donating all royalties of this book for environmental education programs in Pakistan, which is my country of origin. And then this other new book, and I was really pleased that the book got these multiple types of endorsements from a Nobel laureate in chemistry, but also from the chief environment officer at Microsoft, from industry, and then also a politician, the former environment minister of Brazil, Isabella Teixeira. Also coming up is this, when I published this with Oxford University Press, they said, well, it's a bit too long and it's too dense. I think it's readable, but I realize it is a bit dense because it covers a lot of physics, chemistry, but also political science and economics. So they asked me to write a short primer on sustainability, which is part of their series called Very Short Introductions, VSIs. You may have seen some of you. So they've asked me to write the VSI on sustainability, which is happily done and sent just last week to the press, and it will be out in January. So it's a short primer. This is like $12 primer, so anyone can easily read it, and it'll be translated into all the major, UN languages: French, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, and Arabic. All right, so that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was, I'm thinking really hard about how to sort of take my own principles in my courses and in my research and sort of bring in some of these perspectives. I will open it up for questions from the audience.
Yes.
So something you talk about is how technology can be disrupting, like making something less unsustainable doesn't make it more sustainable. I was wondering what effect you think our knowledge systems have on that, because arguably in recent times compared to, indigenous knowledge systems,
Yes.
we have become more disruptive. If you look at agriculture, we are now relearning agriculture to be more sustainable, kind of unlearning some bad practices from the Green Revolution. So what role do you think knowledge systems have to play in this?
Yes, great question. With knowledge systems, I would say that I am still of the view that science has a role to play in all knowledge systems. And I do get concerned because I've worked with indigenous people all over the world. Because my PhD dissertation was around environmental conflicts between mining companies and indigenous people. And I have immense respect for them. but sometimes they can come across as anti-science and they try to disparage science. And I think that is not useful. I think there's a way to reconcile science and indigenous knowledge. Traditional ecological knowledge has a great place in actually helping science, whether it's like ethnobotany or so many other areas. But where there is supremacy on either side is a problem. Scientists have a chip on their shoulder, but a lot of the tribal leaders have chips on their shoulders too. And we need to find a way where these epistemologies are actually working together with this common goal that we need to have things empirically tested where possible. Sometimes it's not possible to empirically test everything, but if you can't, then at least know your assumptions that you are making. So that's how I would approach it. Other questions?
Any other questions?
Well, thanks for a lovely talk. And this is maybe a little off point, but we've got dozens of students here, and I've spent my entire life, except for 1 year in industry, my professional life in academia. So when students come to me for advice, I'm really good at like giving them academic advice, but when it comes to like, the diversity of sort of things that you've done and accomplished, I think our students and I myself would really benefit if you had to give maybe a little bit of advice to students who are interested in really the interdisciplinarity that really characterizes environmental studies. What's one or two things you would encourage our students to do, while they're here? I think that could be really, really useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, one of the things I say to my students around interdisciplinarity is that it requires much more effort. First of all, you need to read much more. So if you are game for doing all that, then that's great. But don't do environmental studies because you think you don't want to do calculus and you don't want to do, and you want some hodgepodge, which was like, yeah, whatever, it work. I have some students like that I've had in various, and that's not the right motivation for it. And I think if you think about interdisciplinarity as an adventure where you are making all these linkages and you are going to have to read more and understand all these different fields, then it's great. But that's my cautionary term. My concern with a lot of interdisciplinary work is that people have a very thin understanding of any one concept, and they can lead to huge misunderstandings. And that was one of the reasons I wrote this book, Earthly Order, is my concern was that a lot of our environmental science students, not just students, but the general public, they don't understand the foundational laws of nature, and yet they are trying to comprehend climate change. You can't do it. You need to understand, so that's why the first part has so much chemistry and physics in it, because if you don't understand that, I just ask sometimes my students, in their senior years, like sometimes they come and they're like, do we know what are the 4 fundamental natural interactions? They don't know what are the 4 fundamental natural forces or interactions. And I think it's important that you know that, because you're going to build, you need to understand. So that's how I would approach the interdisciplinarity part, is be willing to do. And nowadays we have ways to do it. You can read an audio book, or you can, instead of listening to Taylor Swift, you can, have your, podcast on, something. And yeah, it takes that effort. Otherwise, it's very difficult to do. You don't want shallow interdisciplinarity, because that can lead to more problems. There are questions?
I have a quick follow-up question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rick. So there's a lot of conversations about the importance of collaboration.
Yes.
And as a chemical ecologist, I've always been told, don't try to be the chemist.
Yes.
Collaborate with the chemist, because the field's changing so fast. And so on the same time, you want the fundamental understanding and that breadth that you've talked about, and read really widely. Can you just talk a little bit about the role of like collaboration and how someone with environmental studies background maybe is an ideal like bridge maker, collaborator?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. We are with reference. That's an important role we play, as environmental system scientists, is we can connect those people who are really doing much more reductionist work, and they're devoting their entire life to study a species or a molecule at times, compared to others who are looking at grand philosophical questions. So we have an opportunity to build that bridge. And so it's important to work in a team. I totally agree there that you don't want to necessarily presume you have all of that detailed knowledge, but you do need a wider gamut of knowledge across those different fields in order to do justice to them. So building a team for a research grant or, even for writing books, one of the things I am a big fan of is edited books. Academia actually looks down upon edited volumes, but in fact, edited volumes, if they're well put together by an editor, are a great way for getting that collaboration and getting in-depth understanding of each other. And so when I'm reviewing tenure dossiers, I don't look down on edited books. And as chair of the department, now I have to do a lot of that work. And you need to understand whether someone is just taking a shortcut and not doing the right way and where the book is published, all that. But that's one way I would say of collaboration that has been a really effective one for me. But there was one. Yes, Rick.
I just had two quick points. One, your earlier part of your presentation reminded me of an interview with Robert May, the Queen's Science Advisor, preeminent theoretical ecologist, asked about the position of ecology in this hierarchy of sciences. He said, well, ecology is not rocket science. It's more difficult. And it was sort of encouraging coming from that field. But
Yeah.
the second point, which I think your question, Colin, preempted to a large extent, pertains to a term I ran into recently in the proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, LOSU, lack of scientific understanding.
Yes.
To be able to look at a problem and recognize, well, we haven't yet forged the tools we need to answer that question. Takes a particular perspective and humility. You talked about feeling humble earlier. But I wonder what your advice would be, and I have a sense collaborating with people that would close that gap. When you're sensing you're at the edge of your disciplinary training, you're sort of a babe in the woods, trying to forge those tools, get at the problem, even as it's a nascent realm, formative stage. It seems as though going back to your elementary text is not an ideal route. Perhaps it's finding a collaborator from the other side of that interdisciplinary chasm. I'm not sure how you would advise this and how you will address that in your new forthcoming book.
Yes, Rick. I mean, I've tried to do that partly through embracing multimedia interactions and finding ways. We are very fortunate where we have different means of packaging of information that is presented to us, whether it's in a TED Talk or whether it is through, different kinds of other mechanisms, even video games. I'm amazed, we have a whole educational video games. There's a whole research area for that. So I'm actually quite optimistic that if we can channel these media appropriately, we can deal with some of that problem. It is still quite daunting. In my own way of doing it is really using all these different channels but you have to filter yourself constantly with misinformation also coming through. And so, but I'm hopeful right now with some of the efforts that are underway with my role with the United Nations. One of the things we have been doing is like I'm on the UN Secretary General's advisory board on zero waste, which is focusing on trying to, even though that is entropically a problematic term because you can't really have zero waste, but it's basically moving towards, asymptotically towards some way of having a society with less impact. And we're going through different mechanisms of how you communicate that to the public, get people to understand what are the systems issues that lead to waste generation. So I'm hopeful, and there's some really innovative work going on around that. So thank you.
Well, we are at time. Thank you. Can you join me in thanking him one more time? And we have a gift for you.
Thank you so much.
We have winners of our book raffle. See Sinette in the back, Lily Siegel, Ella Perrin, and Ben Chisholm. So can you put your hands up? Okay. Congratulations. I think today's talk is such a great sort of introduction to some of the future talks. Like next week, we have Elaine Hoffman from the class of 10, Tackling Carbon, Resilience, Ambivalence, Lessons Learned from One Decade in Sustainable Architecture, thinking about how you design things, thinking about the rebound effect. It'll be like, come with your rebound questions to next week's lecture. So hope to see you next week. Next week, we'll be meeting back in the Curtis Multipurpose Room